Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho arrived in 1960 at a crucial moment in American cinema. The production code that had regulated film content since the 1930s was beginning to weaken, creating new opportunities for filmmakers to explore controversial subjects. Hitchcock deliberately departed from his recent glossy color productions like North by Northwest, choosing instead to work with a modest $800,000 budget and his television crew rather than his usual film collaborators. Paramount executives were concerned about the controversial source material and provided only limited support. This led Hitchcock to finance much of the film himself in exchange for 60% ownership of the negative, a decision that would eventually earn him millions. Joseph Stefano's screenplay, adapted from Robert Bloch's 1959 novel, cleverly restructures the narrative to create the film's famous misdirection. The story begins by following Marion Crane, a Phoenix secretary who impulsively steals $40,000 from her employer's client. She flees town, hoping to use the money to marry her debt-ridden lover Sam Loomis. During a rainstorm, her journey brings her to the isolated Bates Motel, where she meets Norman Bates, the shy proprietor who lives with his unseen mother in the Gothic house overlooking the motel. After a revealing dinner conversation with Norman, Marion decides to return to Phoenix and give back the money. However, she is brutally murdered in the shower before she can act on this decision. The narrative then shifts to follow the investigation of her disappearance, led by her sister Lila, Sam, and private investigator Arbogast. Their search eventually reveals the shocking truth about Norman and his mother. The film marked a significant evolution in the thriller genre by killing the apparent protagonist halfway through the story, an unprecedented move that transformed audience expectations. Hitchcock insisted on strict secrecy during production and initial release, refusing to allow late admissions to theaters. The marketing focused on shock elements without revealing plot details, establishing a new relationship between filmmaker and audience based on deliberate manipulation of viewer expectations. This approach would influence generations of directors to come. The stark black and white photography by John L. Russell was initially chosen for budget reasons, but ultimately contributed to the film's documentary-like atmosphere. This visual choice distinguished Psycho from contemporary Hollywood productions and helped establish its unique identity. At first viewing, Psycho might appear to be primarily entertainment-driven, due to its effective use of genre conventions and universal psychological tensions. The film operates as a suspense thriller, with expertly crafted scenes of tension and release, particularly evident in the famous shower sequence and basement revelation. The narrative employs familiar tropes: a woman fleeing with stolen money, an isolated motel during a storm, a mysterious recluse with mother issues, and investigators following clues. These elements create immediate audience engagement through recognizable patterns that seem to prioritize universal emotional responses. Hitchcock's technical mastery reinforces this surface impression. Bernard Herrmann's musical score uses strings to create visceral tension, most notably in the stabbing scene, where shrieking violins mimic screams. The shower scenes, carefully constructed editing, featuring 78 camera setups and 52 cuts in just 45 seconds, demonstrates masterful control of audience emotion through pure cinematic technique. Visual motifs like water washing away evidence, birds watching passively, and shadows concealing identity initially appear to function as atmospheric enhancements rather than culturally specific symbols. Norman's psychological issues and Marion's moral dilemma could seemingly be transplanted to various settings without losing their dramatic power. Deeper examination reveals Psycho as fundamentally culture-infused, with every significant narrative element embedded in specific mid-century American contexts. These elements cannot be removed without the story collapsing entirely. Marion's theft occurs within a precise financial system where cash transactions for large purchases were standard practice, an opportunity that wouldn't exist in other eras. Her limited economic options as a female secretary in 1960 directly motivate her desperate action. The $40,000 represents not just money, but a symbol of post-war American upward mobility, particularly meaningful when such a sum could completely transform one's social position. Norman's psychological condition emerges directly from American cultural patterns of the era. His taxidermy hobby connects to rural masculine traditions, while his management of the failing motel reflects economic disruption caused by newly constructed interstate highways bypassing older roads. The mother-son relationship, at his psychology's core, draws from mid-century American psychiatric understanding of maternal influence, particularly the Freudian concepts dominating American psychology in the 1950s. Dr. Richmond's final psychiatric explanation uses period-specific terminology that places Norman's condition firmly within contemporary medical frameworks rather than universal psychological concepts. The Bates Motel itself represents a uniquely American phenomenon. This isolated, privately owned roadside establishment, operated by a single individual, reflects the distinctive development of American automobile culture and tourism in the post-war period. Norman's voyeurism through the office wall connects to contemporary anxieties about surveillance and privacy in Cold War America. The physical separation between the modern horizontal motel and the vertical Victorian house creates an architectural tension between American past and present that mirrors Norman's psychological splitting. These elements function as essential structural components that shape character motivation, narrative development, and thematic exploration in ways that couldn't be transplanted to different cultural contexts without losing their meaning. Alfred Hitchcock approached Psycho with deliberate intent to push boundaries of acceptable content while exploring psychological fragmentation within American social contexts. After the commercial success but personal disappointment of North by Northwest, Hitchcock sought a project that would break from his increasingly formulaic thriller pattern. Robert Bloch's novel offered an opportunity to explore darker psychological territory while commenting on hidden tensions beneath America's prosperous post-war surface. His decision to shoot in black and white, despite color being standard for major productions, reflects his desire to create a starker, more documentary-like atmosphere that would enhance psychological realism. The film's classification differs from Robert Bloch's original novel, which would be considered world-centric category, due to its more explicit critique of American institutions and its more deliberately subversive approach to traditional norms. Hitchcock's adaptation softens some of the novel's more explicit elements while maintaining psychological tension, shifting the focus from systemic critique to behavioral examination within established systems. The director assembled a creative team capable of realizing this vision despite studio reluctance. Screenwriter Joseph Stefano, then in psychoanalysis himself, brought personal insight to Norman's character while restructuring Bloch's narrative to create the revolutionary protagonist shift. Anthony Perkins, cast against his boyish romantic image, developed subtle layers for Norman through specific physical mannerisms created in collaboration with Hitchcock, including nervous candy eating, a slight stutter, and distinctive hunched posture, suggesting both vulnerability and menace. Janet Leigh contributed crucial input to the shower scene, working with Hitchcock to balance vulnerability and agency that would make Marion's death more impactful. Hitchcock employed technical innovations, serving his exploration of psychological surveillance and fragmentation. The film opens with a helicopter shot, moving over Phoenix before zeroing in on a specific hotel window, establishing the voyeuristic perspective that continues throughout. For the shower scene, Hitchcock ingeniously engineered the sequence to imply far more nudity and violence than actually shown. Rapid cutting between angles suggested rather than displayed explicit content, allowing the scene to pass production code censorship. Despite its shocking impact, censors couldn't point to any single frame containing objectionable content. The sequence used a body double for certain shots, detachable shower parts for camera positions, and chocolate syrup for blood, creating visceral impact while technically remaining within code restrictions. Bernard Herrmann's musical contribution proved equally crucial. Against Hitchcock's explicit instruction to leave the shower scene silent, Herrmann secretly composed the famous screeching violin section. After convincing Hitchcock to listen once the scene was edited, The director immediately recognized how profoundly the music enhanced psychological impact. This creative disagreement resulted in one of cinema's most recognizable musical moments. The promotional campaign demonstrated remarkable understanding of audience psychology and media manipulation. Hitchcock's insistence that theaters not admit viewers after the film began created unprecedented anticipation and audience discipline, transforming viewing into a cultural event. The trailer, featuring Hitchcock touring the Bates property without showing actual film footage, established a playfully macabre tone balancing horror with dark humor. These strategies reveal how thoroughly Hitchcock considered the entire audience experience as part of his creative vision, extending control beyond the film itself to shape cultural conversation around it. The narrative structure operates through deliberate misdirection that comments on American post-war anxieties about identity and surveillance. The film establishes Marion's theft as the primary narrative concern, developing her character through subtle behavioral details, her nervous glances at the money envelope, and startled reaction to the highway patrolman. This first section creates a conventional crime narrative aligned with audience expectations, only to shatter this framework through her murder. This structural rupture forces viewers to reconsider assumptions about narrative reliability, mirroring anxieties about hidden threats beneath respectable surfaces during the Cold War. Norman Bates represents one of cinema's most complex character studies, developed through behavioral layers rather than explicit psychological explanation. His initial presentation as a shy but accommodating motel manager gradually reveals darker aspects through specific interactions. The parlor scene introduces his taxidermy hobby, connecting to mid-century American rural pastimes while symbolizing preservation of the dead. His nervous chatter when offering Marion food reveals authentic social awkwardness rather than villainy. Most significantly, his defense of his mother shows genuine emotional connection to family obligation, resonating within American value systems of the era. These elements create a character whose psychology emerges organically from recognizable cultural patterns. Leigh Crane functions beyond conventional investigator roles, representing female independence unusual for the period. Her assertiveness with Sam and the sheriff establishes willingness to challenge male authority. Her methodical search of the Bates house shows pragmatic courage. Unlike many female characters in contemporary thrillers, Leigh actively drives investigation rather than serving as decoration or victim. This characterization reflects emerging changes in gender expectations in late 1950s America, particularly educated women's growing dissatisfaction with limited roles. Her practical clothing during investigation contrasts with Marion's conventional feminine appearance, visually reinforcing their different relationships to period gender norms. Secondary characters are developed with remarkable efficiency through cultural shorthand, establishing their function within American social frameworks. The highway patrolman represents faceless authority through obscuring sunglasses and formal manner, embodying growing state surveillance presence in mobile American society. The car salesman's suspicious questioning reflects concerns about women making large purchases independently. Arbogast demonstrates professional methodology through careful questioning and note-taking, establishing authentic period investigative processes. These characters acquire depth through authentic relationships to social roles rather than extended screen time. The exploration of voyeurism constitutes a central thread, examining shifting boundaries between public and private space in post-war America. The narrative repeatedly positions characters and audience as watchers, from Norman's peephole spying to Arbogast's investigation and Leill's exploration. This pattern reflects cultural anxieties about surveillance during the early Cold War, when Americans worried about being watched by foreign and domestic entities. The motel setting represents transitional space between public accommodation and private dwelling, mirroring the era's blurring boundaries between personal and observed behavior. Famous point-of-view shots implicate viewers in voyeurism, particularly when following Norman, carrying Mother to the fruit cellar, creating uncomfortable complicity, forcing audiences to confront their watching position. Money operates as narrative engine, revealing economic anxieties in affluent post-war America. The $40,000 Marion steals equivalent to over $350,000 today, explains her extreme risk. Her motivation emerges from economic constraints facing women in the era, particularly inability to marry Sam due to his debts from his father's funeral and divorce settlement. These financial burdens reflect American concerns about maintaining appearances and social position. Marion's decision follows witnessing oil businessman Cassidy's ostentatious wealth display, including boasts about buying happiness for his daughter, highlighting class tensions. The money remains visible even after Marion's death, as Norman unwittingly syncs it with her car, representing commentary on materialism's ultimate futility. The mother-child relationship explores American psychological understandings of family dynamics prevalent in the mid-20th century. Norman's relationship with his mother reflects the period's focus on maternal influence in psychological development, particularly Freudian concepts dominating American psychology. His explanation that a son is a poor substitute for a lover demonstrates internalization of specific psychological frameworks about mother-son relationships. Layla's protective relationship with Marion provides contrasting healthy sibling bonds. Mrs. Bates, though physically absent until the finale, exerts powerful presence through Norman's interactions. The final revelation represents ultimate perversion of family bonds, yet emerges organically from understandings of psychological development. This thread connects to broader concerns about changing family structures in post-war America, particularly anxieties about single mothers' influence on male children. Psycho engages with American cultural understandings of mental illness. Prevalent in the mid-20th century, Norman's portrayal reflects contemporary psychiatric frameworks regarding dissociative identity disorder and childhood trauma's influence on adult psychology. Dr. Richmond's explanation uses authentic terminology and concepts from psychiatric understanding of the era that Norman was already dangerously disturbed following his father's death, and his condition involved his mother's personality taking over. While simplified for narrative purposes, these explanations demonstrate serious engagement with actual psychological concepts. This approach reflects changing American attitudes toward mental illness when psychiatric treatment was becoming mainstream, while retaining mystery and fear for general audiences. The film presents complex power structures specific to mid-century American society regarding gender and authority. Marion operates within limited professional options as a secretary, while her boss and client casually display financial and social power. The highway patrolman represents impersonal state authority through formal manner and obscuring sunglasses. Sheriff Chambers embodies small-town governmental authority, maintaining control through personal relationships rather than bureaucratic systems. Norman exercises power within his motel's confined domain while appearing powerless in broader contexts. These varied power expressions create nuanced portraits of American authority structures rather than simplistic hierarchies. The film portrays power dynamics as problematic in specific instances without suggesting systemic rejection, focusing on individual behavior within established structures. American concepts of privacy and boundaries receive careful exploration throughout. The film begins in a hotel room where Marion and Sam conduct their hidden relationship, establishing privacy as both desired and potentially transgressive. Marion's theft occurs in her bedroom's private space, while her road journey exposes her to anxiety-generating public scrutiny. The motel creates liminal space between public and private domains, with rooms simultaneously personal and commercial. Norman's peephole violation represents specific transgression against American values regarding personal space and dignity. These privacy concerns reflect Cold War anxieties when Americans worried about surveillance from external and internal sources, fears expressed through recurring motifs of watching and being watched. The film engages philosophical questions about identity stability through American frameworks, rather than abstract concepts. Norman's psychological splitting reflects anxieties about hidden personality aspects, contradicting public presentation. Marion's theft represents rupture between public identity as responsible secretary and private actions motivated by desire. These identity questions connect to concerns about authenticity, in prosperous but conformist post-war society, when maintaining appearances required suppressing individual desires. The film suggests stable identity requires integrating public and private selves rather than separating them, a perspective aligning with predominant American psychological theories. This exploration occurs through character behavior within recognizable frameworks rather than explicit philosophical statements, making questions accessible while maintaining intellectual substance. Psycho achieves remarkable resonance through seamless integration of entertaining thriller elements with exploration of mid-century American anxieties about identity, surveillance, and psychological fragmentation. Technical innovations serve cultural investigations rather than existing independently. The famous shower sequence disturbs not merely through violence, but through violating audience identification with Marion, just as she decides to return to conventional morality, creating commentary on social order's fragility that resonated deeply in Cold War America. Initial critical reaction revealed divisions in how American film culture understood relationships between entertainment and artistic merit. Many mainstream critics dismissed the film as shock exploitation. This perspective reflected contemporary critical frameworks, privileging restraint over graphic content. However, European critics immediately recognized sophisticated use of genre conventions, exploring psychological fragmentation. This critical divide highlighted changing understandings of how popular cinema could engage cultural issues while remaining accessible. Commercial response proved immediately strong, despite mixed reviews, with audiences lining up around blocks. Paramount's limited promotional support enhanced curiosity, creating word-of-mouth excitement about shocking elements. The film earned over $32 million against its $800,000 budget, vindicating Hitchcock's self-financing decision. This success demonstrated audience willingness to embrace films, challenging content restrictions and narrative conventions when executed with technical skill and psychological insight. The film received 4 Academy Award nominations, including Hitchcock's 5th and final Best Director nomination, though won none, reflecting industry ambivalence about recognizing work challenging production code standards. Psycho transformed audience expectations and industry practices regarding psychological horror. Its influence extended beyond techniques to change approaches to character development and audience identification. By killing the apparent protagonist halfway through, Hitchcock demonstrated that audience investment could survive radical narrative ruptures if properly executed. This influenced generations exploring psychological territory. From Roman Polanski's Repulsion to David Fincher's Seven, the film's careful building of Norman through subtle behavioral details established a model for complex screen villains remaining recognizably human despite disturbing actions. Most significantly, commercial success despite low budget and controversial content encouraged studios to take risks with challenging material, contributing to the production code's eventual replacement with the rating system in 1968. The film continues fascinating contemporary audiences because its cultural embeddedness creates meaning layers beyond simple shock or suspense. Norman Bates remains compelling because his psychology emerges from recognizable American patterns of maternal relationships and social isolation specific to his era, while reflecting universal struggles with identity integration. The Bates Motel persists as iconic because it represents a specific space where public and private domains overlap, creating both opportunity and danger. These elements demonstrate how thoroughly Psycho functions as work engaged with its cultural moment, rather than as timeless entertainment or deliberate cultural subversion, establishing lasting significance in American cinema. If you enjoyed this content, please hit the like button and be sure to subscribe. Also check out our previous episodes. We'll see you next time.